Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. The NFL Draft is in the books, and now the fun begins for us as we get you set to dominate your fantasy leagues in the 2020 season. I'm Jamie Eisenberg, and look at these faces. These guys have dominated NFL Draft coverage all weekend long, and now they're ready to break it down for you here on CBS Sports HQ. Adam Azer, Dave Richard, Heath Cummings, and let's get to it, fellas. Now we get to look at everything that we know about the upcoming season because all these rosters are, for the most part, getting set, and that means we can break it down from a fantasy perspective. We're going to talk a lot about the rookies and the players that were impacted by the NFL draft, but before we get into the actual draft and the players that were taken, there was some news that happened over draft weekend that I think kind of gets brushed under the rug. So we're going to start with some of the non-draft news that happened these last few days, and a pretty big trade that could impact fantasy football values for the upcoming season. The Dolphins acquiring Matt Breida from the San Francisco 49ers for a fifth-round pick. Now, it might seem like nothing from an NFL perspective, but for fantasy purposes, it could be big because we know the Dolphins looking at a revamped backfield. They bring in Jordan Howard this offseason, but the trade for Breida, instead of drafting somebody, could loom large. Adam, let's start there. Talk about the trade. What do you think about the Dolphins' backfield now?
Well, I think that every team that's had Jordan Howard as their running back has eventually realized that they're better off without Jordan Howard. That's why he's on his third team in 4 seasons. I think it's likely, if you're going to project the two, that Howard has better stats, that he has more carries, more yards, and certainly more touchdowns. Breida would have more catches. What I'm hoping is that after half a season of neither of these guys being very good for fantasy, the Dolphins give the ball to Breida more. They realize he's the explosive guy. Jordan Howard is one of the worst in the NFL at making explosive plays, and we actually could get a fantasy-relevant running back because you have to be intrigued by Matt Breida. He's been very efficient in his NFL career. If he can stay healthy and he actually gets some work, we might have a startable running back. That's the only way we're going to get true fantasy value out of this backfield.
Yeah, 2018, Breida was a fantasy darling as the main running back for the 49ers because of a bunch of injuries to that San Francisco backfield. All right, Heath, I'll start with you. Who's the best running back in Miami this year?
Oh, if I'm projecting it, like Adam said, I'm projecting Jordan Howard to score more fantasy points. I do think it's more likely that he will start week 1 with Breida in a backup role, and Breida is awesome in that role. Give him 10 to 15 touches in a game behind the starter, and he's just absolutely fantastic. Give him more than that, and more often than not, he leaves the game with an injury. So I do think if I was playing in a best ball league, I'd be more interested in Breida in the double-digit rounds, but I don't know that you'll know which weeks he's going to break a long run. I'll take Howard.
Now, if you're asking me who I'd rather have between the two of them, I would say that it's Breida, but I'm really not interested in getting either one of them until round 8 at the absolute earliest. I can't lose sight of the fact that Jordan Howard was better than Miles Sanders in Philadelphia for the first half of last season. And then Miles Sanders went crazy when Jordan Howard got hurt, and I think it's a different battle here. Here's what you need to know. Chan Gailey, in his last stop with the Jets and his previous stop with the Bills, and even before that, has always used multiple backs. Sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to how he uses them. I think Breida is a little bit more explosive. I think he's the better pass catcher. So in PPR leagues, I am gladly taking him first, and I think he's got more upside. So I'll take him first in non-PPR as well.
I'm going to take Breida first in PPR. I'm going to take Howard first in non-PPR. I think Adam said it. Howard probably going to lead the team in touchdowns. I think that will give him a slight edge in that format. But as we know, Jordan Howard, not exactly the best pass catcher. Not that Breida is either, but we'll see how the Dolphins use both. But Breida definitely the more explosive of the two, so I'd rather him in the formats where catches count. San Francisco busy on draft weekend, making a bunch of trades. They also sent away another player that once upon a time could have had some fantasy prominence. They sent Marquise Goodwin to the Eagles in swapping 6th-round picks. We saw the Eagles obviously very busy in terms of adding to their wide receiver core. They drafted Jalen Reagor in the first round, add a couple of guys on day 3. So, Dave, when you look at this trade, obviously none of us are really interested in Marquise Goodwin. It's more about the impact on the Eagles' receiving core. I know you love Jalen Reagor. How do you think this is all going to work with all these guys, especially if Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are back, which is what it looks like is going to happen?
There seems to be a trend here with the receivers that Philadelphia added in the draft. Let's see, Reagor, fast. Hightower, fast. Quez Watkins, fast. And Marquise Goodwin, doesn't he have some track speed as well? They're trying to get faster on offense, which doesn't bode very well for Alshon Jeffrey and his broken foot. I think Goodwin is just a wait-and-see type player. I don't see him being a good contributor. I think he's going to be someone that fantasy managers can roundly avoid. I still think Reagor is the best receiver on Philadelphia right now.
Adam, what about you? Who's the best receiver in Philadelphia?
If he's healthy, I will slightly take Alshon Jeffrey. I think Zach Ertz will have the best stats, obviously, but that's not your question. Marquise Goodwin actually had about 960 yards just a couple years ago. It's been a long time since Alshon Jeffrey's been able to do that. It's been about 5 years, mostly because of injury. But I think Jeffrey will be better on a per-game basis than all of them. If he's not healthy, then I guess I would take Jalen Reagor. But I think per game, Jeffrey's still going to be the best. But I don't know that we're going to get one really good receiver here. I think, like we said, it's mostly just help for Carson Wentz.
I think the important thing to keep in mind with the Eagles is there is a competition for the number one wide receiver, but it's going to be at best the number two pass catcher in the offense because Zach Ertz is the number one. Over the past 2 seasons, the Eagles below 50% of their pass attempts to wide receivers. Now they've got 17 of them competing for 3 roles. I think it's great news for Carson Wentz. He's got speed all around him. 2 or 3 of these guys should be good. They should have enough depth to where if they have injuries, it won't be as bad as it was last year. The biggest impact for me is good news for Wentz. If I had to pick one right now, I'd go with Alshon Jeffrey, but I don't have any Eagles wide receivers in my top 40.
Wow, that's telling. Yeah, I would lean toward Jeffrey as well if he's healthy. But look, if he's out, that foot injury, as we know, he had surgery on his Lisfranc in December. If he's going to be out for any portion of the start of the year, that's going to only make things that much better for Jalen Reagor. So if you're rooting for Reagor, you want to see Jeffrey miss significant time. If you're rooting for just the best guy there, it's probably still going to be Jeffrey just because of his rapport with Carson Wentz. But I think everybody said it best. Zach Ertz, the best pass catcher, and let's not forget, they're going to throw to their running backs as well. Both Miles Sanders and Boston Scott will be involved in the passing game. One more note from the San Francisco 49ers. They make a change at left tackle. Joe Staley retires, so head to the Hall of Fame there, big fella. You're going to be 5 years from now, probably a first ballot inductee into the Hall of Fame. They replace him with Trent Williams, who, as we know, Washington's been trying to unload Williams for the last 2 years. They finally are able to find a taker, probably not the compensation they were looking for, but San Francisco does get a new piece to their offensive line. Let's talk about the 49ers offense, though, because as we see, they move on from Goodwin. They move on from Breida. They change at the offensive line. Are we going to see a difference in anything, Heath, from this 49ers offense, or is this going to be kind of status quo for the main options there of Kittle, of Debo? We did see a new receiver in Brandon Ayuk, but obviously Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman now the 2 top running backs.
Yeah, I think it solidifies things in the backfield just a little bit. And before, I felt like with Mostert and Tevin Coleman, their upside was really limited by the fact that if one of them got hurt, there were still 4 running backs on the roster, and so they could still chop it up. Now we're maybe just an injury or 2 away from someone have a chance at a feature role. As far as the efficiency of the offense, we don't know with Trent Williams if he'll be able to stay healthy. We haven't seen him play football for 2 years, so I have a hard time believing the offense will be more efficient. They were wildly efficient last year. I think the hope is that they can be as efficient as they were. And how many plays they run in terms of passing and running, that's going to come down to how good the defense is. It looks pretty good right now.
Adam, we know George Kittle is going to be the first 49ers player taken in all fantasy drafts. Who's going to be number 2?
Deebo Samuel. I think I did a Twitter poll after they took Brandon Ayuk in the first round. Who's going to be better, Samuel or Ayuk? And Samuel won in a landslide, according to the audience. So I don't know that people are really looking at Ayuk as a major threat to Deebo Samuel. I think they're going to throw the ball more. So I think they both could have a role, and I think Deebo's showed himself to be a very talented player. I think he's the second guy drafted. I'm a little bit nervous about him with the addition of a wide receiver in the first round. I think it limits his upside a little bit, but yeah, I expect him to come off the board after the top 50, but I think in a 12-team league beginning in round 6, you could see Deebo in the mix.
Dave, what about you? Who do you think the next player is going to be drafted for the 49ers?
It's going to be Mostert, not Deebo Samuel. I'm worried about Deebo getting Brandon Ayuk in there and Kittle being back at full strength. And I think it's an improvement on the offensive line, having Trent Williams replace Joe Staley. So I see Mostert as still the best running back here. I'm not really interested in taking him with a top 70 pick. It's got to come right after that. But he's still the one that I would want. Deebo, it doesn't feel like he's quite as special as he was before the draft and before the addition of Ayuk. I think that matters. And I think that losing Matt Breida, one less person in that backfield, one step closer for Raheem Mostert to being the lead guy.
Yeah, I think it depends on format for who's going to be second after Kittle. I think if it's PPR, you'll probably see Deebo Samuel go first. If it's non-PPR, you'll probably see a situation of Mostert going first just because of what he means in the backfield. But let's not overlook Tevin Coleman. Even as well as Mostert played last year, the 49ers kept going back to him as their starting running back. He wasn't their most productive running back, but they still lean on him quite a bit, and now there's one less mouth to feed. So we'll see if Jerick McKinnon's healthy, but I do think Mostert's arrow is pointing up with the fact that Breida is now gone. Jameis Winston signed, or is expected to sign, a deal with the New Orleans Saints to be what could be their third-string quarterback. Maybe he's going to be second-string, and as we saw last year, after Drew Brees suffered that thumb injury, when he went down, they did not turn to Taysom Hill, although the Saints rewarded Taysom Hill with a pretty nice contract extension, 2 years, $21 million. Kind of speaks volumes to how much they think of him, but if we get Jameis Winston to the Saints as expected, Keith, what does that mean for his dynasty value?
I mean, it's a good landing spot in terms of what just happened with Teddy Bridgewater. He could certainly learn from Drew Brees and Sean Payton and go through the New Orleans car wash, I guess we'll call it now, and then somebody wants to pay him $30 million to be a starting quarterback. But now we're looking at a year where unless Drew Brees gets hurt, we're not going to have Jameis Winston, and no guarantee after that year that he's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. That drops him outside of my top 25 dynasty quarterbacks for the first time in a long time.
Adam, what do you think? Any interest in stashing Jameis Winston in a dynasty league?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he had LASIK surgery, so that's going to solve all the problems, right? I think so. Look, I didn't know that we thought Teddy Bridgewater was going to be a starting quarterback in another team this time a year ago. I think there are going to be a lot of bad starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and Jameis Winston's going to be better than some of them. So absolutely there's reason to stash him. It could be with the Saints in 2021. This year he's not going to have much value, but with the Saints in 2021, that's possible, or maybe he goes somewhere else and he's still a prolific passer. He was a top 5 fantasy quarterback, so yeah, I'm stashing him.
I'm pretty sure
we're talking about... Go ahead.
Sorry, Jamie. No, I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure if I saw him on the wire, I'd pick him up, and I'd feel good about it. So if you've got Jameis on your dynasty team already, just keep him.
But we have some winners for you. That's what we're going to take a look at next when we come back here on Fantasy Football Today. Some winners from the NFL Draft. Doesn't necessarily mean rookies. We're talking about some guys that have seen their stock on the rise, like Todd Gurley, like Melvin Gordon, like Carson Wentz, and like A.J. Brown. You're going to want to take a look at these guys next year on CBS Sports HQ. Speaking of dynasty leagues, we could see the Patriots have a quarterback that may have some interest for some people, probably deeper formats, 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues, because they did not draft a quarterback in the NFL draft. They've yet to sign anybody significant in free agency, and right now it looks as if Jarrett Stidham is going to be the starter for Week 1 in New England, since right now he's atop the depth chart. You may have heard Tom Brady, no longer a member of the Patriots, now in Tampa Bay, sneaking in other people's houses, but that's a story for another time. But here we go with the Patriots, and what does this mean for their weapons? And so when you look at Jarrett Stidham as the quarterback, Dave, what do you think about Julian Edelman now, if in fact this is going to be the pairing that we see come Week 1 in New England?
I know it's not the same as Brady to Edelman. In fact, it's pretty much a 180. But on the flip side of it, what's a good option for an inexperienced passer than a really good, reliable route runner in the slot? And that's what Edelman is. And he's not going to be popular on draft day. I think you wait for him to kind of fall in your lap, potentially as a number 3 receiver, even in PPR. If you can get him in those middle rounds, I think it's a good move.
Keith, where are you drafting Julian Edelman?
I probably won't draft Julian Edelman very often, but I agree with Dave. He's a number 3 wide receiver now in PPR. He could be drafted in that format if you needed 3 wide receivers as early as maybe round 7 or round 8, I think. I don't know that there's a ton of upside here, but there's still some other quarterbacks available, and there may be quarterbacks available after you have completed your draft. So I don't know for sure at this point we're going to see Stidham as Edelman's quarterback for the full season, but even in that worst case scenario, Edelman should find his way into the top 36 wide receivers.
Yeah, I think he might end up being a little bit underrated on draft day in PPR. I can't imagine I'm going to draft him in non-PPR. He's just waiver wire fodder basically in that format, I think. But in PPR, you know, I think I'll throw it to you, Jamie, and ask you how you'd compare him with Deebo Samuel, because I think he's probably going to catch 15 to 20 more passes than Deebo Samuel. I don't know. And it might come down to touchdowns. Samuel will have some more rushing yards for sure, but it's kind of topical, I guess, and I think I'd have a little bit of trouble. I'd go with Deebo for upside, but I think if I were just doing a projection, I might actually project more fantasy points for Edelman in PPR.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, I think people are going to see Julian Edelman probably somewhere in the round 5, round 6 range in PPR after a ton of wide receivers come off the board, probably 25 to 30 or at least at that point, and then they're going to have to make a choice. Do you want to take a chance on a guy who's aging and a little bit brittle with a new quarterback and potentially a bad one? Or do you want to take a chance on somebody, like you said, who has a little bit more upside? And we could see the 49ers maybe decide to throw the ball a little bit more than they showed us in their Super Bowl run last year. Although, why would you break that formula if it works? So Edelman's going to be interesting. And then I think this means you're sort of taking really, really long-term gambles on guys like N'Keal Harry. Obviously, Mohamed Sanu. They did add Marquise Lee for what that's worth. It just feels as if the Patriots might be tanking for Trevor. Could be something to keep in mind as we look at the Patriots as they move forward. They're probably not going to be considered a winner in reality and in fantasy following draft weekend.
Your news in 90, four-star wing Kerwin Walton out of Minnesota committing to North Carolina. He's the 6th commitment for the Heels class of 2020, which ranks 3rd in the nation behind Kentucky and Duke. Walton sat down with our Evan Daniels today to talk about his decision.
I just had a really good relationship with the coaches. The atmosphere, it was really great there. You know, the fans show a lot of love. I thought that it was the biggest stage in college basketball, and I think that's a great place for me to learn and grow.
Elsewhere in the ACC, four-star power forward Ernest Ross also headed to North Carolina, but not to play for the Tar Heels. He's going to Raleigh to play for NC State. Our partners at 24/7 Sports ranking him as the number 43 player in the class of 2021, and he's the 2nd four-star player to pick the Wolfpack. In football, the top player in Alabama is leaving the state, headed to Tennessee. 5-star defensive end Dylan Brooks committing to the Vols on Sunday over Bama and Auburn. He's ranked as the number 18 player overall in the class of 2021. And the new-look Chicago Bulls have a new general manager. ESPN reporting they're hiring Sixers executive Mark Eversley as their new GM. He'll replace Gar Forman, who was fired earlier this month. The Bulls also poaching Arturas Karnisovas from Denver to be their VP of basketball operations, announced a few weeks ago.
Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're recapping a lot of things that happened with the NFL Draft this past weekend and helping you spin it forward to winning your fantasy leagues this year. And speaking of winning, there are obviously players that come out of the NFL Draft that look like big winners. We'll talk about some of the losers coming up later, but we always want to start with the positive first. We're going to take a look at some players who are either veterans or rookies that ended up in good spots following the draft that could help them as winners to help your fantasy team this year. So let's take a look at Dave's list first here. He's going to give us 5 winners that he has coming out of the NFL Draft. And we're going to take a look at these guys and see how they could maybe turn into not just starting options, but potential league winners for you this year. You got Dak Prescott getting another weapon, Davante Adams not getting another weapon, a couple running backs here that don't necessarily face a lot of competition, and a third one in Chris Carson, same situation. So Dave, let's start with Gurley and Gordon. A lot of people interested in these 2 running backs. You got Gurley coming into Atlanta after being released from the Rams. Gordon signing as a free agent with the Broncos after his contract expired with the Chargers. Why are these guys winners?
Well, you start with Gurley, and his competition for playing time is Ito Smith, Brian Hill, Kadre Allison. I would have bet good money that Atlanta would have drafted another running back, and they didn't. I would have lost. And Todd Gurley now stands to have a huge workload in the Falcons offense, and this is an offense that has afforded a lot of touchdowns and touchdown opportunities to running backs in the past. It's a good offensive line. You've got wide receivers that force the safeties to play back. It's all going to work out for Gurley, and now I feel much more comfortable with him as a top 15 type of a running back rather than worrying about issues like somebody coming to take work from him or his knee wearing down. Frankly, the knee is the only issue. Sounds like the Falcons are fine with it. This is the first time I've been optimistic about Todd Gurley in about 2 years. Now, as for Melvin Gordon, I think that he's in a good situation as well. When you look at the receivers that were added, Denver clearly wanted to add speed to their offense. Gordon's going to be the first guy up there. I think he's going to play on a lot of passing downs, and that's really what saved him in the past, is catching a lot of passes, scoring a lot of touchdowns. I think those things will happen for him in Denver.
Definitely a lot to like about those 2 guys following the draft. And, you know, for Gordon, we'll see how this Broncos offense is going to click, but he's in a very, very good situation as long as he could hold off Phillip Lindsay, who we know has been a fantasy darling for each of the past 2 seasons. Let's move now to Heath's list of winners, and he's got some guys that I think are a little bit interesting in terms of some maybe not obvious winners, but one that stands out to me is Allen Lazard. As we take a look at your list here, Heath, looking at some of these players as well. You got Lazard on here. You got some running backs that I think benefit, certainly Clyde Edwards-Helaire, given the situation of his pick in the first round and everything that Andy Reid said about him. James Conner gets some competition. Maybe not the best competition, but some competition. We know you love Gardner Minshew. Get a chance to talk about him as well. But the two guys there at the bottom, Keyshawn Vaughn and Allen Lazard, tell us why you like them.
Yeah, I think Lazard, you just look at it. Beginning of last year, the first third of the season, he couldn't even get on the field. And then all of a sudden, he was Aaron Rodgers' second favorite wide receiver, and they added nobody. He goes into the year, I think, as the clear number 2. And that may not mean a ton of targets in this Green Bay offense, but he is a third-year wide receiver. I do think he will continue to improve, and I think he has a chance to be a top 40, top 35 type wide receiver. I actually have him projected right now for more fantasy points than any of the rookies because they didn't land in great spots. I do think he could be someone you're actually starting in a 3-wide receiver league. And then Keyshawn Vaughn, I would have never guessed before the draft that he had a very clear path to being the second best rookie running back in 2020. I'm not ranking him as the second best rookie back, but he only has to beat out Ronald Jones and become the feature back in a Tom Brady-led offense. This could be absolutely outstanding for him in the short term and in the long term. He's one of those guys, I don't know how much upside he has. I may rank him very close to the same in both redraft and dynasty, but for 2020, fantastic landing spot.
All right, so give me your rookie running back rank list right now. Obviously, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm going to assume just based on how you gave your list of winners, is your favorite. But you say that Vaughn could be 2. So give me the way that it goes for you. Is it Edwards-Helaire, Vaughn, or are there other guys in between?
It depends on the format, but if we're looking at PPR, I will go, this will change a lot. I will go Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I will go Taylor, I will go Vaughn, I will go Swift, I will go Akers.
You're putting Vaughn ahead of Swift and Akers. I think a lot of people are looking at that as probably the bigger surprise, but obviously landing spot does matter.
Well, yeah, and I think you look at the competition he's going to have to overcome, and I don't know in terms of Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, they're all going to have a hard time in this abbreviated offseason, but I do think if Vaughn gets that job, it could be a better job than the one in Los Angeles with the way they've stopped throwing to running backs as of late. And I will also say that I'm not going to argue too strongly. 4 of these guys, not Edwards-Helaire obviously, but the rest of them all back to back to back to back in my rankings right now.
Yeah, very similar for me too. Is anybody taking Ronald Jones over Vaughn at this point?
Yeah, I am. But I don't have a great reason for it. I think most likely scenario is Jones starts the season as the first and second down guy, and Vaughn is the third down guy. I think the best explanation for why I would keep Jones ahead of him is because rookie running backs that aren't drafted with a high pick, they usually don't get a lot of work right out of the gate. We usually have to wait a while for them to carve their role out, unless it's just like a third down role. So I think just to assume that he's going to be the starter is really not rooted in history, because recent history says that's not going to happen, that the veteran is going to keep that job, at least at the beginning of the season. So I think Jones will have his opportunity to win that job and to keep it.
Okay, but let me ask you a scenario that you like to play out as the result. If I were to tell you last year that Miles Sanders would finish the way that he finished, would you draft Sanders or Howard first?
Well, the thing is, I have no faith in Jordan Howard. I still think there's a chance for Ronald Jones to be a better running back. And I think Miles Sanders was the second running back selected in the NFL draft. It seems to me he's a much better prospect, or at least a better prospect, than Keyshawn Vaughn. I have some doubts about how good Vaughn is. I think that's kind of where I'm hung up. I don't know if this was such a great draft pick. I try not to be a scout because I don't know, but just reading scouting reports, I don't love the pick. If it were a guy like Miles Sanders, then I would say, yeah, he's gonna win that job eventually. I don't have that much faith in Vaughn, but what do I know? Obviously, it's going to change. Let's see what happens in the preseason. Let's see what the reports look like. But right now, this is not as strong of a pick as Miles Sanders was last year.
Understandably so, but I think we could see Ronald Jones has obviously struggled in this system, and we'll see how much the Tampa Bay scouting report and what Jason Light and Bruce Arians have said following the draft about Vaughn could speak a little bit more in terms of what they think of him once we get on the field. Adam, you had a situation with your winners that kind of played out similarly. Some of the higher end draft picks as the second year wide receivers we're looking at here, but some of these guys that were drafted last year in the first round weren't as good as some of the guys drafted later, and they turned out to be better fantasy options. We're talking about A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin. We've said this list time and time again. Deebo Samuel's another one we talked about. Carson Wentz, a winner for you. Hayden Hurst, Drew Lock because of the additional weapons, and Matt Breida because now he escapes purgatory in San Francisco for a chance to start in Miami. But let's start with Wentz and then the year two wide receivers. I'm really curious, though, just why you think all these year two wide receivers, or at least the key ones, are winners.
Deebo's the only one that had a first-round wide receiver taken in Jalen Reagor. I think the fact that I expect them to throw more So I don't think he's going to lose that many targets. Plus, they don't have Emmanuel Sanders anymore. So I don't think anybody got worse. And the 3 rookie wide receivers that I've been targeting the most, sophomore wide receivers that I've been targeting the most in drafts are in order: DK Metcalf, Marquise Brown. I think he's a great sleeper right now because I think they're going to have to throw the ball more this year, just natural progression of the quarterback. And actually, N'Keal Harry as one of my last picks. I've been taking him a lot, but we had a really, really good wide receiver class last year. By the way, I'm not saying that's my order of how I like them, just those are the guys I've been targeting. A.J. Brown is the best one. But we had a really good, strong class. They had really good years. And nobody, I think, really got hurt on draft day. So when you see wide receivers break out, it often happens in year 2, like it did for Michael Gallup and like it did for DJ Moore. Some of those guys, I think maybe 3 or 4 of them are going to really break out. I'm excited about this class. Carson Wentz, I think, is obvious, Jamie. They added a lot of speed. They added yards after catch. He finished the season when Alshon Jeffrey got hurt with arguably the worst wide receivers in football. It's a lot better situation right now.
Dave, are you concerned at all about any of the second-year wide receivers having regression? You know, they were so good in so many situations last year, but we know sometimes there's a guy that has a setback. Is there any one of those guys that makes you nervous?
I hate to say anything bad about Deebo Samuel, but there is concern there now. Even though he did well last year, half of his touchdowns were on runs, and Brandon Ayuk is kind of a similar player to him, except he's a little bit faster than Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle is going to be on the field, hopefully, fingers crossed, 16 games. So I still like Deebo Samuel, and I'm looking for him on draft day, but it's got to come at the right time. I don't think round 6 is that right time. Marquise Brown's another one that I'm a little bit worried about, but it's not because of the receivers that were added in Baltimore, it's just because of the way that Baltimore operates. But it will help him that he's healthy coming into training camp this year. That's a big step for him. So he does have an opportunity to take a step forward in his progression this year, but he's got to get those opportunities, and I'm not sure there's enough of those to go around in Baltimore.
The winners for me, I took a more of a rookie slant on all of these guys, just looking at the guys that ended up in some, I think, favorable situations. Josh Kelly is potentially going to be the second running back in Los Angeles for the Chargers behind Austin Ekeler. He just has to beat out Justin Jackson, and Justin Jackson hasn't proven anything, has a hard time staying healthy. Our buddy Pete Prisco said, watch out for Josh Kelly, could be one of the surprises of this running back class. And Darrington Evans playing behind Derrick Henry. As we know, Henry coming off a season with over 400 total touches when you factor in the playoffs. If he goes down for any reason, Evans could be that guy playing in that situation, and I think he could be successful, the running back from Appalachian State. Shenault, Mims, and Pittman all ended up in spots where they can get a lot of targets, probably more so than you would think. Shenault could be the second receiver behind Chark. Mims could be the second receiver behind Crowder, and Pittman the second receiver behind T.Y. Hilton, though. Looking at the running backs, Heath, how are you projecting the guys behind Ekeler? Are you with me that it's Kelly over Jackson? Are you still taking Jackson over Kelly, or are you just avoiding him both?
I'll probably end up avoiding them both until we get more clarity, but I would just barely take Kelly over Jackson. I don't know enough about whether Kelly can be an impactful running back in the NFL, and Jackson has proven that he's probably not. Like, he's probably just a guy. So there's an opportunity for Kelly to step in. I don't think either of these guys, whoever wins that job for the number 2 role behind Ekeler, and I think the most likely situation is that Jackson has it week 1 and then Kelly takes it at some point during the year. I don't think either of them is getting a Melvin Gordon workload, though. I think it's going to be cut back from there because Ekeler will have a higher percentage of the touches.
Adam, if you draft Derrick Henry, are you handcuffing him with Evans, or are you just going to wait and see what happens if Henry does miss any time?
I'll probably handcuff him, but I could see dropping Evans fairly early. Look, he was a third-round pick, and then once you get past the third round, the track record for day 3 running backs is pretty bad. But Kelly, luckily, was the first running back taken in day 3. But being there are a lot of good third-round running backs that we've seen lately. So maybe Darrington Evans is something good here, and we know they're going to feed him. I mean, they're not going to change their offense dramatically if Derrick Henry gets hurt. They're still going to want to be a running football team. So I do think it's worth handcuffing him. Absolutely, I would draft him there. I worry that he might be somebody, Darrington Evans, that I cut pretty early because I need the roster spot. But if I have Henry, yeah, I think he's more suited than Dion Lewis to step in and carry a big workload.
I think, as we've seen, a lot of people are probably more suited than Dion Lewis. That could be Evans this year, could be Kelly replacing Melvin Gordon, or at least helping Justin Jackson to replace Melvin Gordon. A few winners from the rookie perspective. But when we come back, we're going to take it some of the losers that got impacted by the NFL draft. Some players who are seeing their values go in the wrong direction. Aaron Rodgers, Cortland Sutton, Michael Gallup, and Devin Singletary all got company. We'll tell you what their fantasy value looks like next here on Fantasy Football Today.
Getting you refreshed, the NFL telling network executives to expect the schedule to be released as early as May the 7th. Schedule makers in the process of designing a 2020 season that has several different wrinkles. The standard 16-game, 17-week slate will be unveiled, but there are contingency plans being discussed. Those plans include a Super Bowl that kicks off on February 28th, a regular season that starts as late as Thursday, October 15th, and the elimination of bye weeks and the Pro Bowl. Jameis Winston closing in on a one-year deal to play for Sean Payton and the New Orleans Saints. According to multiple reports, it would close the book on his career in Tampa Bay. 5 seasons, 0 playoff appearances, and he'll have to battle it out for the starting job in New Orleans because the Saints are also re-signing Taysom Hill. A 2-year deal worth $21 million. That would make him the second highest paid backup quarterback in the league behind only Jacoby Brissett, who's backing up Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis. And the NBA looking to reopen some of its practice facilities by the end of this week. ESPN reports that it will only apply to cities and states that have relaxed their stay-at-home orders, and those facilities will only be open for individual workouts.
And when we come back, we're going to take a look at a little rookie-only draft that we held over the weekend. I texted everybody. I said, let's do it. Thankfully, everybody took part. And you get to see the results here. We did 2 rounds. Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and some of these great receivers. I'll tell you where they ended up in our rookie mock draft here next. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. So we just got finished telling you about some winners from the NFL draft. And where there's winners, unfortunately, there are losers. So we're going to take a look at each of our lists and tell you some guys that are losing their fantasy value heading into the 2020 season. Dave, we'll start with you. And you got a pair of Packers on this list. So Heath said in our previous segment that Allen Lazard is a winner, and that's a big reason because he didn't get a lot of competition. Aaron Rodgers didn't get a lot of help, unfortunately, and it was a rough night for him watching a backup quarterback get drafted, another running back get drafted, which hurts Aaron Jones. Damian Williams loses value with the addition of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Marlon Mack, same thing with another running back on board in Jonathan Taylor, and DeAndre Swift is not going to make things happy for Kerryon Johnson. But let's talk about the Packers. The Rodgers, no new help. Aaron Jones, a lot of help. Pair of Aarons here losing fantasy value.
It's troubling, and I think the first 2 picks that the Packers made tells you a lot about where they see the team going in the not too distant future. Obviously, Jordan Love's not going to start anytime soon, but the fact that he's there, that's not really the whole reason why I don't like Aaron Rodgers. That's actually just a little tiny bit of it. But the addition of A.J. Dillon, who's a big physical back, had to have reminded Matt LaFleur of Derrick Henry. And LaFleur coached Henry 2 years ago when he was an assistant in Tennessee, and now he just found a clone of Derrick Henry to potentially split that workload 50-50. And if they're splitting the workload and they're already running the ball a lot, then what does that mean for Aaron Rodgers? He's not throwing the ball nearly as much. So I think you're going to see Aaron Jones still lead the way, but A.J. Dillon's going to have a sizable role. And I'm interested in drafting him now. At first I wasn't. Now I am. And I'm not as interested in drafting Aaron Rodgers as a starter. I actually flirted with the idea of taking Joe Burrow ahead of Aaron Rodgers. I can't do that. But I will take Matthew Stafford, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, all ahead of Aaron Rodgers in fantasy drafts this summer.
Let's talk about Aaron Jones for a second because he was, so good last year for fantasy, leading the NFL in touchdowns with 19. Heath, where are you comfortable drafting Aaron Jones now?
I'm still fine with him in the second round. I think this will have an impact on his long-term future in Green Bay, but it was always a committee in Green Bay. I don't really think they're going to take significantly more work away from him. He was awesome in the red zone. I still think he'll be a top 12 back in both formats. Just doesn't have quite as much upside.
Adam, what about you? Where are you drafting Aaron Jones?
I think in non-PPR round 2, in PPR round 3, I think I'm a little bit more worried about his catches than his carries, and that has nothing to do with A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon comes in, to me, he gets the Jamal Williams role in year 1. Aaron Jones, there's a difference between a guy like Aaron Jones and a guy like Kerryon Johnson. Aaron Jones has been awesome in the NFL. There's no reason to give him less work. Okay, he should get more work. I'm worried about his catches, though, because he didn't really get a lot of them when Davante Adams was healthy. So I think you're looking at a guy who could be a liability in PPR when the touchdown rate goes down. But I think people might overreact to the A.J. Dillon draft pick. I think Jamal Williams should be pushed to the side, and that's the split right there, with Aaron Jones getting 2/3 of the carries and Dillon getting 1/3.
Going to be really interesting to see what Jones's average draft position is. For me, I'm not taking him in round 3 until either format. I think this is just enough of a downgrade for him that you have to drop him at least a round, and we'll see if it impacts him any further once the drafts start happening for you guys and impacting our ADP. Let's take a look at Heath's losers right now. So Dave had a pair of Packers on his list. Heath has a pair of Broncos on his, and as we saw with Denver adding a lot of firepower through the NFL draft, they take Jerry Jeudy in round 1. They add KJ Hamler as well. They're adding to their wide receiver core, helping out their young quarterback and Drew Lock, but not a good situation for 2 of their pass catchers. Heath also taking a look at a couple rookies that didn't exactly win with their landing spots. Jalen Hurts, he put in his notes for J.K. Dobbins. He's a loser for 2020 because I think we're all expecting if the Ravens move on from Mark Ingram in 2021 that Dobbins could step in and have a pretty big role. It'd be great for dynasty leagues. And then Darren Waller, Raiders also adding a lot of company to their wide receiver core as well. But let's talk about the Broncos, Heath. So you were very high on Courtland Sutton pre-NFL draft, and now he has a lot of company with a guy in Jerry Jeudy who could be the number 1 wide receiver there. And then clearly KJ Hamler is going to take away some targets, which is going to hurt Noah Fant as well. So pick your Bronco. Tell us why he's a loser.
Yeah, I didn't really downgrade Sutton that much after the first round when they took Jeudy. I thought those two could coexist with Fant and still be very good. But then they just kept taking pass catchers. They took Hamler, they took Albert O, Drew Lock's former teammate, the tight end, who just is about as fast as these wide receivers and much, much bigger. So there's just too much confusion now for me amongst all these targets in Denver. I do think that they've signaled to us that they are going to throw the ball more this year than they did last year. That's a good thing for everybody. I don't feel confidence that Sutton is going to dominate targets as a number 1 like he did last year. And I'm just a little bit concerned that by mid-season or by week 10, we see Jerry Jeudy actually overtake him as the number 1. He's certainly the better prospect.
Yeah, in terms of pedigree, like you said, Jeudy is the better prospect, and Sutton did not exactly put up eye-popping numbers once Locke took over at the end of last season. And Fant, look, he had a lot of big plays last year, but can that translate to consistent plays and consistent production? So I dropped Sutton outside of my top 24, just barely, he's 25, and I dropped Fant out of my top 12 tight ends. I'm concerned about him reaching his ceiling. He certainly could, and as we've seen, we've talked about this a lot, he can get a lot of explosive plays from explosive offenses, and these guys are all young, so it doesn't necessarily mean that one guy has proven themselves to be better than the next. Sutton has the best track record, but we'll see how it all works with Drew Lock once he gets a full offseason, depending on what kind of offseason that is. Let's look at my losers now. We'll start with Adam's losers first. Adam losing faith in a Cowboys pass catcher in Michael Gallup, just looking at the situation for him with the addition of CeeDee Lamb. Aaron Rodgers, another loser for him. I'm surprised you have Ronald Jones as a loser, Adam, considering that you said that you like him better than Keyshawn Vaughn, but understandably so. Getting competition is not going to help. And Darrell Henderson getting the addition of Cam Akers on the roster there. So let's talk about Gallup and Henderson. Really haven't spent a lot of time talking about the Rams backfield, but how much of a downgrade does Gallup get with the addition of Lamb in Dallas?
So I think that I could see Michael Gallup putting up similar numbers, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns on 113 targets. You got to remember, Randall Cobb and Jason Witten had 166 targets last year. Cobb had 800 yards. I mean, in 15 games, CeeDee Lamb might do that. That'd be a pretty good rookie season. I don't think that Gallup is automatically hurt. What I think it does, though, is it limits his upside. So if you're drafting a wide receiver and you're hoping, oh, well, this guy, maybe like a DK Metcalf. I know Heath has Metcalf and Gallup back-to-back. You know, which one of them has a chance to really break into the top 12? Gallup's not going to be the answer unless Amari Cooper gets hurt, probably. So I think that's what it does. It limits his upside. It makes him really a number 3 receiver on draft day. And Jamie, as far as Darrell Henderson goes, my suspicion is that Cam Akers is better than him. Akers' college numbers weren't really eye-popping, but his offensive line was just abysmal. And Malcolm Brown might be involved too. So I don't know there are any winners in that Rams backfield. I think Akers has the chance to, in a Miles Sanders-like fashion, win that job by the second half of the season. And it wasn't a good day for any running back who had competition brought in the first 3 rounds, like Ronald Jones and like Darrell Henderson.
Dave, I'm looking at your PPR rankings. You have CeeDee Lamb ranked ahead of Michael Gallup. You think the rookie is going to automatically come in and be better than the third-year guy?
I think what helps CeeDee Lamb is that he can line up inside or outside, and so can Amari Cooper, and I think those are the types of targets that are missing. Adam referenced how many targets that are up for grabs. It was Cobb who played in the slot, Jason Witten that worked the middle of the field. These are areas that CeeDee Lamb can play, and I think that there's an easy path for him to get over 100 targets. Same thing with Amari Cooper, provided he stays healthy. Gallup will be good on the target share that he has, but he had a catch rate below 60%. He led the NFL in drops with 13. There's more than meets the eye with why the Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb, besides he was the best player available. Apparently he was 6th on their draft board. They wanted to add a better receiver, and I think they did it.
We'll find out who it's going to impact the most. I would still take Gallup over Lamb, but Lamb was my favorite wide receiver coming into the NFL draft. I did not like this landing spot for his long-term value, but we'll see how it impacts him for 2020. Still think Gallup has the higher ceiling based on what he should be able to do in finding the end zone. The losers for me, Devin Singletary, he gets competition with the addition of Zach Moss. I was hoping that it would not necessarily be somebody who's going to take him out of the opportunity for some goal line carries, but it seems as if based on what the Bills are saying that's going to be the case. Mark Ingram gets competition for himself from J.K. Dobbins, which I think will impact him in 2020 as well. Mark Cooper we just talked about. I don't like the addition of Tua Tagovailoa for Davante Parker. They were going to get a quarterback upgrade no matter what, but I think Parker's benefited last year with the passes that he was catching from Ryan Fitzpatrick, because Fitzpatrick just lets the ball go and doesn't care. Tua, I think, will care a little bit more. And O.J. Howard not getting traded. I mean, come on. What is Tampa Bay doing? Let him go. Let him go someplace where he can actually flourish. This was just so frustrating to see O.J. Howard staying with the Bucs. But, hey, that's the situation we got. They say they might want to use some 2 tight end sets. We'll see if they're actually going to do that. But I wanted to see O.J. Howard traded. Maybe that still happens. All right, so there's your losers from the NFL draft. Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and nonstop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.